Welcome, friends, to another night of timeless stories. Tonight, we journey through 5 different worlds: the misty hills of the English countryside touched by Celtic spirits, the solemn halls of medieval Italy, where Mary walks among bishops and farmers, the snowbound hearths of medieval Rus, where patience is tested, the marble temples of Greece, where Hestia herself teaches harmony, and the fertile fields of Al-Andalus, where angels whisper in dreams. Each tale is a window into wisdom, reminding us that family, virtue, and harmony are treasures greater than gold. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories like these, remember to subscribe, strike the like button, and share them with friends, so more people can join us on these journeys. Now, let us begin. The way of the household is accomplished through harmony between husband and wife. On the gentle slopes of Rowan Hill, in the rolling English countryside, stood a thatched cottage with whitewashed walls, a garden of herbs, and an ancient rowan tree growing by the door. The house belonged to Edmund and Eleanor, a young couple whose love was well known among their neighbors. They were not rich, yet their home always seemed full of warmth and music, and travelers passing by often spoke of the light that came from Rowan Hill. The first snow of winter had fallen on the fields of Rowan Hill. Frost laced the hedgerows, and the breath of cattle rose in pale clouds against the dawn. Inside the cottage, the fire crackled low, throwing long shadows on the whitewashed walls. Though the hearth was warm, an uneasy chill lingered between Edmund and Eleanor. Edmund sat at the table, his hands rough and calloused from the plow. He was sharpening a blade, his brow furrowed. Eleanor moved quietly about the kitchen, laying out bread and cheese, her movements careful and restrained, as though every sound might spark an argument. Finally, Edmund broke the silence. Edmund said, "I've been thinking, Eleanor. If I can clear the western field come spring, we could double the flock. More sheep means more wool to sell at market. With luck, we might even put aside enough to buy another acre." Eleanor paused, her hand on the bread knife. She turned to him, her voice soft but firm. "Another acre, Edmund? You rise before the sun and return after dusk, yet the house grows no warmer. The children I long for are not found in fields of stone and bramble. What good is land if it leaves us no time for family?" Edmund set the blade down with a clatter, his jaw tight. "You speak as though I chase after land for myself alone. Do you not see? Every field I till, every sheep I raise, it is for us, for the life we could have, for the children you speak of. How else are we to feed them when they come?" Her eyes softened, but there was pain in them. "And yet, husband, what is the worth of bread without joy at the table? You look beyond the horizon for tomorrow, while today slips from our grasp. I would rather one field, tended with love, than 3 sown with silence." A silence stretched between them, heavy as the snow on the roof. The only sound was the pop and hiss of the fire. Edmund looked into the flames, saying nothing. Eleanor turned away, blinking back tears as she cut the bread. They ate together that night, as always, but the laughter that once filled Rowan Hill had fallen quiet, replaced by the unspoken weight of their discord. The snow came heavier that night, muffling the hills and hedgerows in a white silence. The cottage at Rowan Hill stood alone against the storm, its windows glowing faintly, a beacon in the dark. Inside, Edmund sat by the hearth, oiling his boots, his face still set with the weariness of the day. Eleanor stirred a pot of broth, humming softly to herself, though her tune carried more sorrow than cheer. Suddenly there came a knock at the door, not a timid tapping, but a measured strike, 3 times, as though from someone unafraid of the storm or the cold. Edmund frowned. At this hour? In such weather? Who travels the road tonight? Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and moved quickly. "Whoever it is, they will freeze if we leave them out there. I will see." She unbarred the door, and the wind rushed in, carrying with it a tall figure cloaked in deep green, a harp strapped across his back. His eyes shone strangely bright, reflecting the firelight, and though snow dusted his shoulders, he seemed untouched by the cold. "Good evening to you. The road is long, and the night colder than my bones will bear. Might a wanderer find shelter by your hearth? Eleanor's heart stirred with pity. She stepped aside. Come in, traveler. Our house is small, but the fire is warm. Sit, and I shall bring you broth and bread. Edmund muttered under his breath. Another mouth when the broth is thin as it is. The stranger heard him, but only smiled. He laid his harp gently upon the table, its polished oak gleaming like honey in the lamplight. His voice, when he spoke again, carried the weight of ages. What is given freely returns tenfold, and what is withheld is often lost. Eleanor placed a bowl before him, and he bowed his head in thanks. Edmund sat stiffly, arms crossed, yet his eyes kept flicking toward the harp, as though uneasy. After the meal, the stranger lifted the harp and began to play. The sound was unlike any tune they had ever heard. It was older than church hymns, older than the hills themselves. The notes rose and fell like the turning of seasons. Spring's awakening, summer's joy, autumn's sorrow, winter's stillness. Edmund tried to resist, but his lids grew heavy. Eleanor clasped her hands, her eyes shining. Soon both drifted into a vision, drawn into the song's spell. They saw their cottage split in two, one side lush with blooming orchards and happy children, the other barren, its roof caved in and fields overrun with weeds. In the vision, Edmund tried to build alone, but the walls crumbled. Eleanor tried to light the hearth alone, but no fire would catch. Only when they placed their hands together upon the beam of the roof did the house rise whole, golden smoke curling from the chimney. A voice like the river whispered, "The way of the household is harmony. The hearth prospers only when husband and wife are of one flame." At dawn they awoke to find the bard gone, leaving only a sprig of rowan berries upon the hearthstone. Edmund looked at Eleanor, and she at him, and both felt the sting of their quarrels melt like snow. Edmund turned to Eleanor, his face stricken. "I thought the land itself would be our salvation, but without you beside me, it turns to dust." Eleanor reached for him, her voice trembling. "And I thought love alone was enough. But without your labor, there is no bread for the table. We are halves of one whole, Edmund." From that day, Edmund plowed the fields not for himself, but for their family. Eleanor tended the hearth not in waiting, but in joy. They shared their burdens, spoke kindly, and when children finally filled the house, the cottage on Rowan Hill became a beacon of prosperity. And so the countryside remembered the tale, that a home divided falls to ruin, but a home united becomes a fortress stronger than stone. Neighbors who quarreled were told to remember Rowan Hill, and even travelers whispered the saying when passing the old rowan tree. "You shall pay filial piety to the wives of your husband's brothers. Do not despise your neighbors. When relatives come, make tea for them. When honorable elderly family members arrive, show warmness and respect. You shall make sure to clearly distinguish between coarse tea and fine tea." In the hill town of Monteverde, where olive groves clung to the rocky slopes and bells of stone churches tolled across the valleys, there lived a young woman named Lucia. She had married into the noble family of the Signori di Monteverde, kin to bishops and even a cardinal in Rome. Yet though she entered a house of honor, she often felt herself an outsider, a farmer's daughter amid robed lords. Her husband's brothers' wives, splendid in silks, looked down upon her homespun dress. They spoke of courtly feasts and papal decrees, and when she came with her simple offerings, bread, olive oil, figs, they smiled politely but coldly. Lucia bore their silence with humility, yet in her heart she whispered, "Why must I honor those who scorn me? What virtue is there in bowing before disdain?" One autumn feast day, the extended family gathered. Bishops with crimson caps, farmers from the fields, widows, children, and merchants. The house was full, and Lucia was charged to prepare the tea service, a custom brought from traders who crossed the seas. She laid out the coarse leaves in earthenware bowls for the farmers and neighbors, and kept the fine, fragrant tea for the honored elders, as her mother-in-law had once instructed. But when the wives of her husband's brothers entered, they watched her with sharp eyes. The first sister-in-law said coldly, "Will the farmer's daughter serve us coarse leaves as well?" The second sister-in-law said, mocking, Perhaps she cannot tell the difference. Lucia's cheeks burned, but she bowed low. I serve as I was taught, fine for the elders, coarse for the young. Yet to each I serve with the same heart. The gathering grew restless, and a murmur spread. Some said Lucia had shown pride. Others whispered she had followed custom rightly. Confusion threatened to sour the feast. That night, troubled and alone, Lucia went to the small chapel near the vineyard and knelt before the image of the Holy Virgin Mary. Candlelight flickered on Mary's painted face, and Lucia wept. Mother of mercy, how shall I walk in this household? If I bow, they despise me. If I stand, they condemn me. Teach me the way of humility and honor. As the wind stirred through the chapel, a soft light descended, and the Virgin herself stood before her, robed in blue and white. Daughter, remember, honor is not measured by the worthiness of others, but by the purity of your gift. To serve with respect is to mirror heaven, where angels bow before God, though they too are radiant. Show warmth to the elder, kindness to the neighbor, and humility to the proud. For humility conquers pride as water quenches flame. Lucia's tears dried and peace filled her. She rose, returned to her house, and on the next feast day, she prepared the tea once more. She greeted each guest with equal warmth, bowing to the elder bishops with reverence, smiling to the farmers as friends, and serving even her scornful sisters-in-law with gentle hands. When they mocked her again, their words rang hollow, for all others saw the grace in her bearing. The cardinal himself lifted his cup of fine tea and said, "This house prospers not by silks or titles, but by the harmony of its hearth. And here the farmer's daughter has taught us the greater part of it." From that day, no one in Monteverde despised her. And it was told among the townsfolk that when Lucia walked among the vineyards, the Virgin's mantle seemed to shade her path, and even the proud bowed their heads. Do not hold a grudge about what your parents-in-law say, and do not be capricious when your husband criticizes you. Long ago, in the forest beyond the great river Volga, there lived a maiden named Vasilisa, who was married to Ivan, son of a wealthy peasant family. Ivan's parents were stern folk, God-fearing and proud of their lineage. They had tilled the land for generations, raised barns strong as fortresses, and sent their sons to fight in the prince's wars. When Vasilisa entered their household, they watched her with sharp eyes, measuring her every word and deed. The snow had just begun to cover the fields around Ivan's village, pressing silence upon the thatched roofs. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the bells of Vespers echoed faintly from the parish church down the hill. Inside the log izba of Ivan's parents, the great stove glowed, casting long shadows across the wooden walls carved with simple crosses. Vasilisa, young and fair, moved about the house with a proud grace. Her hands were skilled, but her spirit was restless. She swept, kneaded, and stoked the fire, yet she carried herself like one who felt the weight of watchful eyes. And indeed, eyes followed her. Her mother-in-law, Daria, sharp as a raven, sat by the stove spinning flax, her gaze never leaving the young bride. The father-in-law, Mikhail, broad-shouldered and stern, sat at the table with a jug of kvass, silent but watchful. At last, Daria spoke. "Child, you have left ashes in the oven again. Bread baked on dirty coals tastes of bitterness. A wife must keep the stove as pure as her tongue." Vasilisa's cheeks flushed. She set down the poker with a little clatter and said, "I baked as my mother taught me, and never once did our bread turn bitter. Perhaps the fault lies in the wood your sons have chopped." Daria's eyes narrowed, and the spinning wheel creaked faster. "Ah, so now the bride teaches the mother and blames the sons who have kept this house since before she was born?" Ivan shifted uneasily, but said nothing. Mikhail then rumbled from the table, his voice deep as thunder. "And see here, too much flour scattered on the bench. Waste not, girl. Flour is dearer than pearls this winter. Do you think the miller gifts us his grain for your careless hands?" Vasilisa's eyes flashed. She turned quickly, the braid at her back swaying like a whip. "I work from dawn till night, my hands red with kneading, yet nothing pleases you. Shall I measure every dust of flour as though it were gold?" Mikhail struck his palm upon the table, the jug rattling. "Better a wife who measures grain than one who scatters it like chaff. In this house, thrift is life itself. For a moment, the Izba fell silent, save for the crackle of the stove. Vasilisa's lips pressed tight, but her heart seethed. Pride warred with duty, and the weight of their judgment pressed on her like the winter snow upon the roof. Ivan at last spoke gently, though with firmness. "Vasilisa, my dove, they mean no harm. Listen and learn. It is their way. Do not answer so quickly." But Vasilisa turned her face away, tears brimming in her eyes. Beneath her breath, she whispered, "If I am to be a servant in my own marriage, then let the saints bear witness." And though she fell silent, the nettles of resentment grew in her heart that night, pricking her even in her dreams. And so, days and weeks passed, and tensions remained still. One evening after a quarrel had left the house in heavy silence, Vasilisa fled into the birch grove and fell to her knees before a little wooden icon of the Mother of God that hung from a tree. There she poured out her sorrow. "Holy Mother, why must I endure this bitterness? My tongue is sharp, my heart restless, yet their words wound me, and I cannot forgive." No voice answered her, only the sighing of the branches in the wind. She rose and returned home, still carrying the weight in her chest. The very next morning, Vasilisa rose early to cook kasha for the household. She stirred the porridge while thinking of her own mother's hearth, and so the pot boiled over. When Daria, her mother-in-law, tasted it, her face grew sharp. "This is burned, child. Do you think we have grain to waste on such carelessness?" Vasilisa bit her lip, remembering her prayer in the birch grove. She meant to stay silent, but pride leapt in her chest like fire. She said, "It is not so bad. Even burned kasha will fill the belly." The old woman's eyes flashed, and words flew back and forth until Ivan came between them. That night, Vasilisa's pride turned to tears. She fled once more into the birch grove, knelt before the darkened icon and whispered, "Holy Mother, I tried, but I failed. Their words sting too deeply. Oh, Mother of God, I asked you, but am I cursed to be always at odds with them?" Still there was no voice, but when she opened her eyes, she noticed the snow on the branches bending, heavy yet unbroken. "The birch bows, yet it does not break," she thought. The thought stayed with her. A week later, Mikhail, her father-in-law, found flour spilled on the bench. His voice rumbled like thunder. "Look at this waste. Flour is dearer than pearls this winter. Will you scatter our life into the dust?" Vasilisa's heart leapt with anger, but she remembered the birch. She bowed her head and answered only, "Forgive me. I will do better." That day, while clearing the oven, she found a crust of bread wedged deep in the corner, enough to feed the children. She took it as a sign. When she bent instead of breaking, something had been preserved that might otherwise have been lost. The winter had broken at last. Snowmelt filled the paths with mud, and the river cracked and roared as ice broke apart. The air smelled of thawing earth, and with it came restlessness in every soul. In Ivan's household, the women sat by the stove spinning flax while the men mended tools for the fields. Vasilisa worked beside Ivan's younger sister Katya, a lively girl with quick fingers and a quicker tongue. Katya teased, as younger siblings often do. "See how you spin, sister-in-law? The thread is thick as rope. You'll make a poor cloth with that hand." Vasilisa, weary from chores, snapped back before she thought, "And you, child, spin as though you were still playing with dolls. Better to waste thread than to tangle it like a fool." Katya's cheeks reddened, and she fled to her mother in tears. Darya looked up from her work, her eyes hard. "Is this how you speak to your husband's kin? Have you no gentleness, no patience?" Before Vasilisa could answer, Ivan stepped in, his face troubled. "Vasilisa, my dove, you wound with your tongue more deeply than with a knife. A sister is not an enemy. Why must you always strike so quickly?" His words pierced her heart. She lowered her gaze but said nothing. Yet inside, resentment burned like dry straw in flame. Why do they always defend her, never me? Why must I always bow my head? That night, when the house lay still, Vasilisa slipped quietly into the birch grove. The snow there was crusted with ice, gleaming in the moonlight. She knelt before the little icon, her hands trembling. Vasilisa wept in prayer. "Holy Mother, I tried to hold my tongue, but again I failed. Their rebukes fall on me like hailstones, and I cannot bear them. If I keep silent, my heart burns. If I speak, I sin. Tell me, what is the way?" The grove gave no voice, only the creak of branches swaying. Yet her eyes fell upon the small shelter built for the icon, where a thin candle flickered. The night wind pressed through the cracks, but the flame bent without dying. She watched it long, mesmerized. The wind blows, yet the flame endures. It bends, it wavers, but it does not die. She lingered until dawn's first light touched the birches, then returned home with that thought lodged in her heart. The next day, Darya set Vasilisa to mend clothes. The stitches were clumsy, for her mind wandered. When Darya rebuked her, the old anger rose, but she remembered the candle flame. She drew a breath and bowed her head. "Forgive me, mother. I will mend them anew." Darya muttered, still sharp, but the quarrel ended there. That evening, Ivan saw her working by the lamplight, restitching the torn garment. He sat beside her and, after a silence, laid his hand gently on hers and said, "You are learning, Vasilisa. Strength is not in the loud voice, but in the quiet heart. You are like the lamp before the icons, silent but shining." Her heart softened at his words. For the first time, she felt a strange peace in her silence. Not defeat, but something like strength. And though she knew more trials would come, she also knew the flame endures because it does not fight the wind, but yields to it. But she was not perfect. Again and again, pride returned. Again and again, she failed. And yet each time she went to the grove, prayed before the little icon, and each time, something small seemed to speak to her. Late spring brought not only thaw, but quarrels. The villagers argued bitterly over pasture land, for the grass was scarce, and every man feared his cattle would starve. Even within Ivan's household, the dispute spilled across the table. Mikhail slammed his hand against the board. "We must drive our herd into the south pasture before the neighbors claim it. Better we act swiftly than let them steal what is ours." Ivan frowned. "But if every household rushes to take, the pasture will be stripped bare. Then all will suffer." Darya shook her head, her spindle trembling in her hand. "You speak too kindly, son. Mercy does not fill a cow's belly." The voices rose hotter and harsher, until all eyes turned to Vasilisa, who sat at the end of the bench with folded hands. She had kept silent, watching the quarrel unfold. At last Darya snapped at her. "You sit silent like a stone. Do you think yourself wiser than the rest?" The old pride surged in Vasilisa, but then she looked toward the window. Outside, snowflakes still drifted from the gray sky, falling gently upon the muddy paths, covering the sharp, angry tracks of yesterday. A hush fell upon her heart. She rose slowly, her voice calm. "I am not wiser, mother, only slower of tongue. But I will tell what I have seen. This morning by the river, the herds from 3 houses came together. The beasts pushed against each other, and none could drink. But when the men led them in turn, each had its share, and the water was not muddied. Could it not be so with the pasture as well?" The room fell silent. Even Mikhail's heavy brow softened. Ivan looked at her with quiet wonder. "What you say is true. If we set days and each house drives its herd in turn, the grass will recover. None will be left empty." Mikhail grumbled, but his eyes no longer burned. "Perhaps there is sense in your words after all." Darya pursed her lips, then nodded grudgingly. "It seems your silence has taught you when to speak." So it was decided. The families of the village agreed to share the pasture in turns, and peace returned to Monteverde's fields. Slowly through these quiet lessons, Vasilisa's heart softened. She learned to bow her head at rebuke, not in despair but in strength. Her words became fewer, her patience greater. So it was that, through failures and prayers, through the bending birch, the hidden bread, the steadfast flame, and the falling snow, Vasilisa learned the path of humility. Not at once, nor without tears, but step by step. Her silence was no longer born of pride or despair, but of patience that grew like wheat in good soil. Her mother-in-law began to scold less. Her father-in-law grumbled, but with pride more than anger. Even, watching her, once said, "Vasilisa, you are like the lamp before the icons, silent but shining." Years later, when famine struck the land and neighbors quarreled over scraps, Ivan's household stood firm, not only because they had grain, but because peace reigned inside. The villagers whispered, "Their hearth is strong, for the young wife has learned humility." And when Vasilisa died, the icon lamp in the church glowed more brightly for 3 nights. The priest said softly, "She lived as one who learned, little by little, through silence and patience." And the Mother of God herself received her. When you prepare sumptuous dishes for a banquet, prepare them in variety and large quantity. When you make sauce and vinegar, mix the ingredients thoroughly. After using the utensils and cookers, wash them clean. If all praise you, you are a virtuous and wise woman. In the age when gods still walked among mortals, there was a maiden of Thessaly named Euclea, whose hands were said to bring harmony wherever food was laid. Though she was not of noble birth, she served as handmaiden in the temple of Hestia, goddess of the hearth. In those days, the kings of Greece were forever striving to outshine one another, not only in war and council, but also at the banquet table. At Corinth, King Periandros would boast, "See my oxen roasted whole upon spits of bronze. No man leaves my hall hungry, nor can any match the fatness of my herds." At Thebes, King Polycrates answered, "And what are oxen without the golden goblets from which men drink their wine? Mine shine brighter than Helios himself, and my guests leave dazzled." At Athens, King Megacles laughed, "You speak of herds and goblets? I keep singers and poets, whose voices make the very gods bend their ears. No banquet is greater than mine." But it was not only the kings who competed. Their wives, proud and ambitious, vied to prove their own skill. One would heap honey upon salted fish, another would drown lamb in garlic and sour wine, another would serve mountains of figs stuffed with olives and cheese. The tables groaned under their weight, but the flavors clashed so bitterly that even the guests muttered. They said, "One dish drowns another. My belly is full, yet my tongue is weary." Thus the feast ended not in joy, but in quarreling, with guests swollen and irritable, and praise belonging to none. In time, Athens declared a festival of peace, inviting all the kings and their households to dine together as brothers. But the kings, remembering the rivalries of their wives, grew anxious. Periandros said to the others, "If my queen prepares the feast, she will demand glory above all, and her pride will shame us before Greece." Polycrates echoed, "And mine would do no better. She fills the table with costly dishes, yet the people leave with bitterness." Megacles agreed, "If each of our wives brings her hand to the banquet, we shall be mocked from Sparta to Troy." The king sat in troubled silence, for none wished to yield his wife's honor to another. To choose one queen above the rest was to invite wrath in his own household. At last an elder priest of Hestia spoke, "Why quarrel over whose wife shall rule the banquet? If you desire peace, let the goddess of the hearth herself provide the feast. Hestia needs no rivalry. She serves all equally." The kings struck their staffs upon the ground in agreement. Periandros stood up and announced, "So be it. Let us entreat Hestia to guide the banquet. Thus no wife is shamed and no husband dishonored." But when the queens learned of this compromise, their pride was stung. The queen of Corinth shouted, "What? Shall we yield our glory to a goddess's handmaiden? Better to burn my ovens than be silenced." The queen of Thebes complained, "All Greece shall mock us as idle, unskilled, if we surrender the feast." The queen of Athens screamed, "This is cowardice. Our husbands fear our mastery and so hide behind the goddess." The kings, however, were resolute. Polycrates said firmly, "Better the peace of Greece than the vanity of our wives. The quarrels of women have made men fools long enough." At dawn, they walked barefoot through the marble streets of Athens, each bearing olive branches wound with white wool, the tokens of supplication. Behind them trailed priests, musicians, and a host of citizens, all anxious to see if peace could be won. They climbed the steps of Hestia's temple, where the sacred hearth fire burned day and night, tended by priestesses in white robes. The air was heavy with the smell of incense. mingled with the smoke of the eternal flame. Bronze censers swung on chains, filling the chamber with a low, steady music. The high priestess, her hair bound with a fillet of gold, lifted her hand. "Who comes to Hestia's hearth, and for what cause?" King Periandros stepped forward, bowing low. "We kings of Greece come, burdened with strife. Our wives have quarreled, and our banquets have turned from joy to rivalry. Yet Athens has called for a feast of peace, and we fear to bring shame upon the gathering." Then Polycrates of Thebes laid his olive branch upon the altar. "We beg the goddess who guards the hearth to bring harmony to our tables, as she brings harmony to every house." And Megacles of Athens raised his voice. "Hestia, firstborn of Cronos, eldest of the Olympians, accept our prayers. Teach us how to feast not in pride, but in unity. Grant us wisdom, that Greece may not be mocked before the nations." The priests cast barley upon the flame. The people knelt. The fire leapt high, brighter than before, and a hush fell upon the temple. Then from the flame came a warmth like springtime, and a voice that was not sound but harmony itself filled the chamber. "Kings of Greece, you do well to turn from rivalry. Yet know this, I am goddess, but it is mortals who must learn the ways of harmony. I shall not cook for you, for to do so would rob you of wisdom. Instead I send my handmaiden, Euclea, whose hands are gentle and whose heart knows order. By her work you shall learn what it means to serve, and through her you shall find peace." At that moment the flame parted and a young woman stepped forth. She wore no crown, no jewels, only a plain robe white as new wool. In her hands she bore a wooden ladle, simple yet shining as though polished by the gods themselves. She bowed before the kings. Euclea said, "I come at my lady's command. If you will entrust the banquet to me, I shall show you how harmony is made." The kings lowered their brows to the earth. The queens, who had followed in secret to see their husbands humbled, bit their lips in anger, but none could deny the fire's testimony. And so it was decreed that Euclea, handmaiden of Hestia, would prepare the feast of peace. Euclea began her work humbly. She did not heap the tables at once with a single kind of dish, but gathered many foods from the countryside: olives and figs, fish from the sea, lamb from the hills, barley for bread, honey, and herbs. She laid them in variety so that every guest might find delight, whether peasant or king. When she mixed sauces, she did not throw the oil and vinegar carelessly, but stirred them long until they became one body. Euclea said softly, "So must households be, not oil floating apart from vinegar, but blended in one taste." In the sacred kitchens, the cauldrons hissed and the hearth crackled. Servants bustled about, piling meat upon spits and stacking loaves of bread high as a man's chest. Amid the clamor, Euclea knelt over a humble clay bowl. She poured oil as golden as sunlight, then vinegar sharp as a winter wind. She stirred them with patient circular motions, her wooden ladle slow and steady. The servants paused to watch, smirking. The Corinthian servant mocked, "Why waste your hand on trifles, girl? Guests come for meat, not sour vinegar." The Theban servant laughed, "Yes, stir all you like. When the ox is carved, none will ask about your bowl." The Athenian servant snorted, "Better to heap garlic and honey at once. Men praise what strikes the tongue, not what creeps softly into it." But Euclea did not answer their scorn. She kept stirring, slow as the turning of the heavens, until the two liquids, once separate, had become one shining body. She lifted the ladle and let the mixture fall again, smooth and unbroken. Euclea said quietly, "Alone, oil is heavy. Alone, vinegar is sharp. Together they temper one another. So too are men in cities. Divided they wound, united they endure." She dipped bread into the sauce and offered it first to the servants. Reluctantly, with mocking smiles still on their lips, they tasted. Then their laughter faltered, their eyes widened. The oil's richness softened the vinegar's bite. The vinegar's edge lifted the oil's weight. It was neither harsh nor dull, but balanced, pleasing. Silence fell over the kitchen. The Theban servant exclaimed softly, "It is the same for all." No tongue is left wanting. The Corinthian servant spoke in awed, It makes even plain bread taste noble. The Athenian servant whispered, so harmony can dwell even in a bowl. From that moment, the servants ceased their quarrels. They brought their meats, breads, and fruits not in rivalry, but in service, asking Euclea how best to place them together. And as she stirred sauces, she stirred their hearts, blending them as surely as oil and vinegar. The day came. The kings reclined on couches, the poets recited, and the priests prayed. Then the dishes of Euclea were brought in. There was no single mountain of roasted flesh, no monstrous dish to outshine another. Instead, the tables bore a harmony: fish beside lamb, fruits beside grains, sauces set so each dish was lifted by the other. The guests marveled. Each tasted something different, yet none lacked. Rich and poor alike found joy at the same table. Even rivals who once scowled at one another now raised cups together. At the end, Euclea did not vanish in pride. She gathered the spoons, cups, and platters and washed them clean with her own hands. Euclea, smiling, "The feast is not ended until the vessels shine again." A banquet is judged not only in eating, but in the peace that follows. When the hall was clean and quiet, Hestia herself appeared in the flame of the hearth again. The kings bowed low, but Hestia lifted Euclea's hand and said, "You have seen, O men of Greece, what makes a woman wise. Not pride in splendor, but harmony in service. She who prepares in variety, who blends with care, who cleans after all is done, brings peace greater than armies." The kings swore then that each year at the festival of peace, their wives would prepare the banquet together, not in rivalry, but in unity, following the pattern of Euclea. And poets sang that day, "She who is praised by all is not the loudest, but the one whose hands leave no discord." So Euclea's name lived on, not among the queens, but among the hearths of common folk, where women taught their daughters to mix sauces well, to lay dishes in harmony, and to clean vessels as though they were sacred. Submit to the words of your master the husband. If you behave incorrectly, you shall cease to do so. When you provide service to your parents-in-law, do so as if you are holding a bowl full of water. In the fertile plains near Cordoba, where the Guadalquivir River wound through orchards of fig and orange, lived a middle-class Muslim farming family. The head of the house, Abd al-Rahman, was a man of stern piety, known for his diligence in the fields and his devotion in prayer. His wife Aisha, young and newly married, had come from a neighboring village. She was eager to please, but quick of temper, and in her in-laws' household, she often felt the weight of many eyes judging her every move. Her mother-in-law, Fatima, was experienced in keeping a household, and her father-in-law, Yusuf, was respected as a man who knew both the Quran and the soil. Aisha tried to serve them faithfully, yet sometimes her haste made her careless. If the bread burned, she excused herself. If the water jar spilled, she grew flustered. Once, when rebuked by her husband, she answered sharply. His eyes darkened, and he said, "Aisha, your tongue is like fire in dry grass. Do you not know what the messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, taught, that paradise lies at the feet of the mother? To serve my parents is to serve me, and to serve me is to serve Allah." Ashamed, she lowered her gaze, but the struggle in her heart remained. That night, Aisha dreamt that she stood at a fountain in the gardens of Jannah. The fountain overflowed with clear water, and she was given a crystal bowl to carry. A radiant angel, perhaps one of the Hur al-Ain or even Israfil, spoke, "Daughter of the house, you have been entrusted with a vessel more precious than jewels. If you carry it with care, it will never spill. But if you grow hasty, every drop lost is a blessing wasted." When she awoke, the dream lingered, bright as the morning sun. The next day, her mother-in-law asked her to bring water for kneading bread. Aisha lifted the jar as though it were that crystal bowl from her dream, walking slowly, every step measured. She set it down without spilling a drop. Fatima said softly, "Today your hands are steady, my daughter." Another day, Yusuf asked for his cloak while preparing to walk to the mosque. Aisha carried it folded across her arms with reverence, as though bearing a sacred trust. He looked at her kindly. Yusuf applauded. "You remind me of the hadith. The believer is gentle, for harshness is far from faith. May Allah increase you in wisdom." Yet there were times when she faltered. Once in haste, she snapped at Abd al-Rahman when he asked her to grind more grain after a long day's work. He rebuked her sharply. "Patience is the key to honor, Aisha. Do not let your words weigh heavier than your deeds." She wept that night, but when she prayed, she remembered the angel's voice. Every drop lost is a blessing wasted. Years passed and Aisha's patience grew. She came to move about the house as though carrying that invisible bowl of water in all things. Steady, careful, mindful. Her service brought harmony, and the neighbors began to speak of the family's prosperity. Their fields bore good harvest, their children thrived, and even disputes in the village were often brought to Yusuf's house, for people said, "Where Aisha carries water, no quarrel can last." One spring during Ramadan, the family prepared a great iftar for travelers and neighbors. Aisha oversaw the meal: bread, olives, lamb with saffron, sweet pomegranates. She walked through the courtyard carrying a great copper dish, her steps as steady as in her dream. All praised her, from the poorest guest to the local qadi who came to break fast. That night as she slept, she dreamed again of the fountain in paradise. This time the angel smiled and said, "You have carried the vessel well. The drops you saved were not lost. They became pearls in the river of your deeds, flowing toward the throne." From then on, mothers in that village told their daughters, "Serve as Aisha served, walk as if holding a bowl full of water." And so the proverb lived, not only as a rule of service, but as a story of patience, care, and harmony that made a household prosper in the sight of Allah. And so our 5 stories end, yet their lessons endure. From hearth to temple, from dream to vision, each tale has whispered that peace and virtue are built not in grandeur, but in care, humility, and harmony. May these stories linger with you like the echo of bells after evening prayer. Until next time, may your own hearth be warm, your days balanced, and your nights filled with quiet wisdom. Good night. You may have wondered where the inspirations of these stories came from. It originated from a Chinese book for girls' education from the 16th century. The following is a story that was inspired by the origin of that little book. The winter rain fell like threads of silk over Pingjiang's canals. In the courtyard of the Zhen family printing house, wooden boards leaned against a wall, blackened by lamp smoke, their carved characters glistening with oil. Inside, the smell of ink, pine, soot, and flax, mingled with steamed millet from the women's quarters. Zhen Ruyu, widow of a junior censor, pressed a rice paper proof against a fresh block, lifted it carefully, and squinted. The characters read, "A daughter is the jade of the house, polish her with humility, and she will shine without cutting." She exhaled, smoothing a wrinkle with a bamboo spatula. The line was her father's, long dead, once a classics teacher in Changzhou. He had taught boys the great learning, girls the household rites, and everyone the proper bow to the seasons. Ruyu had kept his notebooks after the funeral, wrapped in indigo cloth, their margins crowded with citations from the Book of Rites, homely recipes for vinegar, and tiny poems about rain. He never wrote a book. She would. The men in the shop called her Gunyanrin, aunt of the shop, half joke, half respect. She paid their wages on time, bargained for paper, and, after nightfall, gathered her nieces and the neighbors' daughters to copy aphorisms by lamplight. In the 3rd year after her husband's death, she announced a plan that made the typesetter cough ink. A primer for girls, short chapters to be memorized and chanted, for homes to grow roots. "It will sell," she said. "Households are anxious. Sons run to Nanjing to gamble. Daughters hear songs from courtesans on the Xinhuai. Let us give mothers something firm to put in their daughters' mouths." The typesetter shrugged. "If it sells, we print." Suzhou's spring rushed in with peony fatness and boat songs thick with wine. Ruyu's cousin, Shen Qiji, a minor prefect with a taste for poetry and lacquer, hosted a salon to show off his collection of foreign curios. A glass bead that magnified characters when held over them. A brass astrolabe whose tongue pointed at stars. Among the guests was a foreign priest in black robes, invited by a curious scholar official. Father Lorenzo de Macerata, a Jesuit with smooth Fujianese on his lips, and a map folded like a secret under his arm. Ruyu came with a draft stitched in yellow paper. She had no intention to read aloud. salons were for men. But when Chiji bragged, "My cousin is making a little book for the women," fans fluttered, sleeves lifted, and the men asked impish questions. "What will you teach them, Madame Jen? To bow to their shadows? To pour tea with the 8 perfections?" Ruyu bowed from the waist. "To bow to their mothers. To pour tea for the old before the young. To keep the 3 obediences without false sincerity." "Ah," someone laughed. "You give them the rope to bind themselves." Father Lorenzo's eyes were keen. "May I see?" he asked in careful tones. He turned the pages, reading slowly. 4 character lines marched like soldiers. "Rise before dawn. Sweep with quiet steps. Speak small, smile small. Answer not with heat. Honor the aged. Share the sweet and sour." He nodded. Beautiful order. And yet, might order silence the cry of injustice? "Forgive my bluntness. I am a foreigner." Shenchiji flapped his fan. "We all love order here, Father. Without it, the grain rots. Madame Zhen understands Li, ritual, with a woman's hand." Ruyu accepted the tea he offered. "Father, in your country, do you not teach daughters to obey?" "We teach obedience to heaven," Lorenzo said, "and to husbands too. But we also say conscience answers to God before men." "Conscience," Ruyu repeated, tasting the new word. "In our learning, the heart-mind is polished by rites. A bowl holds water because it has a rim. And if the bowl imprisons the river?" he asked softly. The room hummed with polite discomfort. Ruyu only smiled. "Then one must teach where to pour." Blocks arrived from a skilled carver in Hukyu Ward. Each character cut mirror true. Ruyu corrected sparingly, changed a "you" to a "must," made silence into gentle speech. The book's structure took shape. 24 short lessons, 1 for each solar term. Weaving domestic tasks with cosmology, sow in rainwater, dry in great heat, wash cups with the patience of winter. She added proverbs from swaddling songs, a few Buddhist echoes the grandmothers loved. Sweep dust from the mind as from the mat. And careful Confucian citations to please inspectors. Her niece Qinghe copied birds in the margins. Wagtail, magpie, swallows returning under the eaves. Yet something troubled her. In lesson 7 she had written, "When your husband speaks, be still. If your mother-in-law scolds, accept." True, yes, the house must have a center. But she had known mothers-in-law whose scolding made girls thin as reeds. She had known husbands whose words were wine. That night rain grained the windows. Ruyu spread her father's notebooks, and between a recipe for plum vinegar and a quotation from the Zhongyong, found a line he had copied from a village teacher. "A good rule bends like bamboo, unbroken in wind." She lifted her brush and with a tremor added to lesson 7. If rebuke is just, reform at once. If rebuke is wine, wait till morning. Answer with truth, soft like warm water. In the morning she feared she had gone too far. She showed the line to the typesetter, who licked ink off his thumb and grunted. "Soft water breaks rock," he said. "Print it." The first chanting took place in Madame Wu's women's hall, where a dozen girls sat with backs straight as brush handles. Ruyu led them, singing each 4-character verse to the same rising and falling tune mothers used for the 1,000-character classic. The girls were giggly till the 3rd lesson, when she brought out a bowl of water filled to the rim. "Walk," she said to Shu, the boldest, "from door to brazier without spilling." Shu grinned, took 2 steps, and a silver lip leapt over, spattering the floor. The girls squealed. Ruyu's face was still solemn. She looked everyone with steady eyes, saying, "When you serve your elders, your hands are such a bowl. Walk the house like this, and harmony will not spill." They practiced again and again, till even Shu could cross the room without a drop. Then Ruyu taught them lesson 11. "Hold the bowl as if it were gold. Hold the word as if it were fire. Do not scald, do not let it fall." When they finished, they were all filled with joy, but no one laughed. All girls sat seriously like Ruyu. Joy was there, but it was inward, hidden behind careful eyes. Word spread along the canals. Mothers came to buy the book for daughters. Grandmothers came for the pictures of birds. Ruyu kept the price low. The margin was thin and her ledger scolded. but she felt a rising, practical joy. One humid summer evening, Father Lorenzo returned with two scholars, Zhu Renshan, a reformer with sleeves full of petitions, and official Shu, round as a gourd and twice as content. They came to the back room of the printing house where Ruyu served chrysanthemum tea. "I have read your girl's classic," Zhu said without greeting. "It is clever as a net. It catches daughters' hearts before the city does. But the net is a little bit loose somewhere," official Shu clucked. "Ritual is the fence around the melon patch. Without it, young feet trample the vines. Madame Zhen's book is a boon to the realm. It is good enough as a woman's work." Lorenzo watched Ruyu's face. She poured tea around the rim of each cup, evenly, not a drop wasted. "I wrote for homes, not the realm," she said. "If Wan Li's governance becomes tranquil, that is heaven's bonus." Zhu tapped the page. "Here, if rebuke is wine, wait till morning. Answer with truth, soft like warm water. These phrases make rebels fat." Ruyu did not flinch. "I added other lines," she said and recited. "Do not answer your husband's rebuke. Do not contradict an elder in public." Zhu's eyebrows rose. Lorenzo leaned forward. "May I ask, why keep both? Why not write plainly? Speak truth in all times." Ruyu smiled uneasily with one side of her mouth. "Because houses have walls and ears, Father. A straight sword cannot pass through a woven screen. A silk cord can." Zhu laughed despite himself. "You are a statesman." "I am a widow running a shop," she said. "Our realm is a stove and 3 rooms." That autumn, a petty inspector from the prefecture came with boots wet from rain and a scroll demanding copies, free, for the enlightenment of the common. He flipped through pages for a phrase out of step, a hint of Buddhist smoke stronger than Confucian incense. He stopped at the soft waterline. Dangerous softness. Women will use this to talk back," he sniffed. "Remove it." Ruyu's mouth dried. A misstep could bring a seal on her door, a fine like fire on paper. But she also knew the girls who had learned to carry water had learned to carry words, steady and gentle. If she cut the line, the bowl would wobble. She bowed. "Honorable sir, consider the doctrine of the mean. Achieving harmony, heaven and earth are in their proper places. If a drunk husband overturns the house, is harmony served by shouting? Soft water saves the bowl." The inspector liked quotations the way cats like cream. He puffed, enjoying his own reflection in her deference. Leave it, but add another supplementary, only in necessary times." Ruyu nodded, and when the official's boots squelched out the door, she presses her palm on the wooden block, as though steadying herself against its grain. She said quietly, "The bowl is not as I carved it." The typesetter shrugs. "It is what sells, Auntie. Conformity keeps the shop open." Ruyu says nothing. On the night of peaches, when Suzhou's household sent fruit to friends and wrote little poems about longevity, Ruyu carried a basket to Shinchiji's salon. Father Lorenzo was there, thinner in the face. He had spent weeks nursing the sick in a riverside ward. He turned the book over in his hands. "You have given your city a song," he said. "I have given them a ladle," she said. "A song is for outside the door. A ladle is for the soup." They stood on the balcony, moon a pale pearl above the canal. Boats nosed along like sleepy geese. Women sang low to children beyond the lattice. "Forgive my earlier insolence," Lorenzo said. "I spoke as a man who does not wash bowls." Ruyu's eyes softened. "You spoke as a man with a different heaven. But you were right to ask, does a rule become a chain? I have wondered that with every page." "And your answer?" She gestured to the canals. "Water finds its level." The book is a weir, a low wall to slow the rush, to let families water their gardens. If someone uses it to drown a girl, that is the sin of the hand, not the weir. Lorenzo nodded slowly. "May God make many weirs then." Ruyu stared at the river. Her soul seemed floating away with the ships. After a while, she said, "But unfortunately, the book is not the one I wish to give." "Not entirely, Lorenzo. Yet your book is sung in every lane now." Ruyu, tired smile. "It is the book they would allow. In this realm, men see more rules as more virtue. I had no choice." Lorenzo folds his hands. In Christ we believe virtue is not a chain. Like your people, we do not value rebellion, but gentle love and patient sacrifice being a different kind of order. These girls may learn conformity from your pages, but in time through the Spirit, they may also learn the liberty that allows them to follow their conscience cleansed by Christ. Ryu looks at him, the candlelight shadowing her face. Liberty, it is not a word I can print, but perhaps it is a word they will hear someday. They stand silent as boat songs drift across the canal, the night full of peaches and incense. In the second winter, the girls' classic went to a third printing. A village wife came with coins sewn into her hem. A silk merchant's daughter came with a maid. A nun bought a copy for a niece, though everyone knew nuns had many nieces. In the lanes, girls chanted, "Sweep the mat, soften the voice, hold the bowl, steady and poised." Critics wrote lampoons about hen wisdom. Defenders wrote prefaces praising Ruyu's filial piety. Someone in Hangzhou pirated the book and replaced soft water with silent water, which made her heart aches. Once at dusk, Ryu walked past Madame Wu's hall and saw Xu, now betrothed, practicing yet again with the bowl, moving from door to brazier with the concentration of a calligrapher. The water quivered but did not spill. Xu smiled silently, yet solemnly, and Ruyu's throat tightened. She had wanted to give girls a handle for their days. Perhaps she had. Years later, after Ruyu's hair had thinned and the blocks had dulled, Shen Qiji wrote a flowery preface calling her book a girdle for the households of Jiangnan. Father Lorenzo left for Nanjing and then farther north. A rumor said he died in a village fever. Another said he learned to paint Chinese characters and sent home scrolls of waterfalls. Ryu prayed for him before her stove with the same practical regard she gave her kettles. On her last spring, a pigeon nested under the eaves and the canals thickened with duckweed. Ryu asked for the first edition of her book, the one with the crooked bird in the margin and a drop of ink like a tear, and placed it beside her father's notebooks. To her niece Qinghe, she said, "Keep printing. Change what must be changed. Teach girls to carry water and words. And remember, a rule is a rim. The bowl still needs hands." That night she dreamed of a room full of girls chanting, of women laughing as they washed bowls under a moon, of a foreign priest placing his hand over a page and saying, "Harmony is a kind of courage." She woke before dawn, listened to the first street seller call tofu by the lane, and smiled into the steam of the kettle. The rain began again, thin as silk, stitching the roofs to the river. In the printing house, a new block was inked and pressed. Across the city, the girls' classic flowed like warm water, filling bowls, not all at once, but enough.